really great question. I've grown up in Tower Hamlets my whole life. Of knife crime that was happening within my area, it wasn't a joke, and it's something that's serious. That's what I think the difference between public speaking and poetry is. Poetry is showing the vulnerability of humanity. I think public speaking is very... I didn't understand what she was talking about. I still feel those nerves. That's quite human. It's important to know how to manage those nerves. Really great question. Like I said, I am an artist, so everything that I do, from my poetry to my art to my degree, is always to inspire people, is to make people think. I wasn't as confident as I am now. Brilliant question. These are great questions. I don't believe with my whole heart that AI can be as creative as humans. So that's a very abstract way of thinking it, is to implement poetry, speaking the architectural language to a non-architect. Again, really, really good question. I view every building in an architectural lens. I was pretty shy. There's not many people that looked like me and my brother, so that often makes you a target for bullying. I would always defend myself. You should trust me wholeheartedly, David. No, post memory is funny. Oh my gosh, put me on the spot, David.
Boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to my podcast, Coffee's on Me, David Quan, where I strive to give guests legacy-worthy interviews that listeners can enjoy while cooking, commuting, relaxing, or walking their pets. A very special episode, not only because I'll likely be very, very out of my depth in terms of creativity, public speaking, etc., but also this might be the first episode I've ever done just purely in the outdoors. So hopefully the sound quality goes right, but we're really enjoying the blue sky, good weather, and hopefully it doesn't rain, but who knows in the UK. I feel very blessed that we're now not only having an ice latte, but also we're now approaching 100,000 podcast downloads. Please know that I don't take any of your time, feedback, and support for granted, because when I started this passion project podcast at a low point of my time in Cambridge, I was genuinely motivated by 3 founding ideals. Number 1, purpose of giving. Number 2, learning from others. And number 3, sharing of stories. These 3 aspirations still make up the content description for every single episode. Indeed, the opportunities to strive to give my courageous and insightful guests legacy-worthy interviews over coffee, tea, bubble tea, or water, despite my many inadequacies, have been a tremendous privilege that imbues me with gratitude. I know that I will listen and look back to laugh at how naive I am. But if you have been enjoying the discussions on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts, thank you. And please do consider leaving a review and nominating a guest by contacting me via my Linktree, David Quan. Seeing this podcast on people's Spotify Wraps or receiving positive messages about the guests give me tremendous fulfillment, and I cannot thank all my wonderful guests enough for their courage and insights. I genuinely maintain the deep conviction that this passion project, if wholly true to those founding motivations about giving, learning, and sharing, is a worthwhile pursuit. So now on to my incredibly talented, hardworking, important, and cool guest. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Sam Elbahja, a dynamic Moroccan-Thai poet, artist, and writer deeply rooted in the vibrant tapestry of East London. Fueled by her rich heritage and the intricate nuances of her socio-economic upbringing, Sam threads joy through her poetry while tirelessly amplifying the voices of marginalised communities. Currently, she's embarking on an architectural journey at the esteemed University of Cambridge esteemed University of Cambridge. Architecture's allure first embraced her when she triumphed in the People's Pavilion competition, seeing her design materialise in the heart of the Here East Olympic Park. One of her most authentic endeavours bloomed in collaboration with Ralph Lauren. Together they explore the beauty of growing up in Tower Hamlets, culminating in poignant poetry that graces screens of Genesis Cinema and the rich mixed stage. National publishers like First Story, international giants like Chicago's Trope have embraced Sam's verses, giving her words a broader canvas. Setting her sights on October, Sam aspired to inaugurate a trailblazing initiative named Give Us the Mic. This platform welcomes artists of diverse backgrounds to the stage, allowing them to shine through singing, poetry, comedy, rap, or any form of spoken expression. The sole requirement: each performer must lend their voice. Sam's conviction in the potency of communication is evident, bolstered by her title as a national public speaking champion. Her recent role as the Uni Slam coach led Cambridge to an impressive 3rd place in the country's spoken word competition. Not content to rest on her laurels, Sam finds purpose in mentorship through organisations like Zero Gravity, Ringle, and Student to Teach. Guiding and uplifting students across all dimensions, she imparts the wisdom of her journey. Artistry flows effortlessly through her veins, with Sam securing the prestigious Painters Stainers Award and gracing the Royal Academy Young Artist Show with her work. Amidst these accolades, her compass steadfastly points to family bonds and cherished moments with friends, underlying her genuine and grounded character. In sum, Sam Elbahja is a trailblazer who masterfully intertwines creativity, heritage, and community. Her journey is a symphony of empowerment and inspiration, resonating far beyond the borders of East London. Well, Sam, really, really pleased to have you, and welcome to my podcast, Coffees on Me, David Quan.
Thank you so much for having me. It's honestly such a pleasure. And to be outside as well is really great. You can enjoy the rarity, like I was saying, of this weather that never comes.
How was your day today?
It's been great. Really, really good. I think, like I said, when it's a sunny day, it's a good day. We know all the time, of course, when it's also raining as well, you can always have a good day, but especially when it's sunny, it's nice as well.
How much do you remember about your speech, Silver Smile?
Yeah, oh wow. It seems like a long time ago, but then again, it also seems like yesterday. It was about knife crime in East London. So I live in Tower Hamlets. I've grown up in Tower Hamlets my whole life. And at the time when I was doing the speech, there was a high rise of knife crime that was happening within my area. And I had to write about a speech that was sort of an interest of mine. So I wanted to speak about knife crime because I felt like it was such a big topic at that time, and I wanted everyone else to know that it wasn't a joke, and it's something that's serious that does happen. So I remember naming it Silver Smile to give it that sense of people need to sort of wake up and see the reality of what's going on in boroughs like Tower Hamlets.
What do you mean boroughs like Tower Hamlets? I mean, I'm from Australia, so...
Oh, fair. Okay. So boroughs like Tower Hamlets, where our socio-economic sort of background is much less. A lot of us are working class individuals, so where we grow up is unlike places like South Kensington that are often quite affluent. So the areas that I grew up in were, rife with often knife crime, gang violence and things like that, but it's to show a boundary beyond what the media often portrays. But when I say boroughs like Tower Hamlets, where there's so much talent and so much love and so much beauty and so much diversity in the areas that I live in, but it's never showcased, and that's what sort of frustrated me, hence why I wrote the poem Silver Smile.
Wow, that's awesome. Would you say that was a key turning point or a moment of confidence booster? Because to me, when I don't have the full story, but it seems like that competition would have been a pretty big part.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a really big thing. I think that was the biggest thing that happened to me when public speaking. So that's when I got into proper public speaking, because I'd done all the sort of open evenings at my school when, people would come visit, I would speak, and I was the representative, the student rep, all of that stuff. So I was constantly speaking for the school anyways. And then when I did the Jack Petchey competition, it was something that...
And you met him.
Yeah, I did meet him as well. Yeah, that was crazy when I was doing my level 2 diplomacy in public speaking. So, it was definitely a big change. I have to say a huge thank you to the Jack Petchey competition, because it really started me off in the public speaking world, but also catalysed me finding myself as a spoken word artist as well. So it was a bit of both, because public speaking and spoken word are very different.
Yeah.
Yet they spawn from the same tree, if that makes sense. So... yeah.
That's really cool. I also did public speaking competitions starting from year 9 or year 10. At that point, I was incredibly nervous, and I knew it was a good skill to have, but you do always see the articles like most people rather die than public speaking.
Stand up on a stage and
So
speak,
I remember in Australia, or at least where I was from, there was like 2 competitions, like Rostrum Voice of Youth and PISA, Play English Speaking Awards, but essentially you have like a prepared speech section where they give you a list of topics and you prepare an 8-minute speech, and then there's also an impromptu session where you have 15 minutes or 5 minutes to prepare for a 3-minute speech, and both obviously had their own different challenges. One of the core, I think, moments for me was entering the competition and then seeing just how other people tackle the same topics, and especially not just in the content, but in the way that they delivered it. So one of the girls, called Amy, actually, we're friends now, she gave her prepared speech without a script, and I just thought, wow, that was incredible. So I was wondering, when you started your public speaking competition, what was it like to do it with other people who you may not have known before, and what did you learn from others?
That's a fantastic question. I think when it comes to especially Jack Petchy, like how you were explaining, there's different stages. So the first stage was like there was a whole group of 30 of us, and then that dwindled down to 3 or 4 of us, and then those internal 4 of us competed against one another. So, and then it went to the next stage. But learning from each other, that's a fantastic question, because everyone has a different way of public speaking and a different way of speaking. Of course, the Jack Petchy, mentors taught us a certain way, the way you hold your hands, the way you have eye contact and things like that. But the way in which you hold an audience is entirely up to you. So I remember performing, and I remember at the time when it was just like the internal people. And one of the boys in my school, he spoke about his mother and the fact that his mother was his world to him, and it was something that was really, really special to him. And there was and he had an accent in his voice, and there was a certain sort of hold that he had when he spoke, everyone listened. And because he had such an emotional story as well, I think it doubles with that. I think with myself, dependent on the topics that I speak about, it's really, because I was speaking about knife crime, it had to be very straight towards the point, and quite direct, because it wasn't a story of my own personally that I was saying, it was someone else's story. So I think it put more pressure, I think, on myself to tell their story right, because it isn't my own. But yeah, I think definitely it's the way people speak, their sort of diction and their tone that makes public speaking or poetry really beautiful.
I know you've done a lot of coaching and mentoring and really helped other people to find that confidence and to excel and to experience the joys of creativity and sharing a story. What are some general observations that you've had as a coach, or just from your own journey, that you think would benefit people in terms of public speaking?
I think the biggest advice I can probably give you is focus on yourself. That is the biggest thing. I think regardless if it's a competition, if you're just speaking in front of a crowd of people, if you're doing a presentation for uni work, whatever it is, you need to focus on yourself, because I think a lot of the time people get lost in their thoughts about, oh, am I saying this right? Or why did that person look at me like that? Am I speaking too quietly, too loud? Am I gesticulating too much? I think people tend to become overthinkers when it comes to performance or when it comes to presenting or public speaking in general. So I think the biggest sort of overall advice that encapsulates everything that I teach everyone is just to focus on yourself, really, really think about what you want to say. And often and most times when it's something of value and when it's something of value to you, it will come out quite naturally because you're speaking from the heart, and that's something you can't really practice or can't really master. It's something that comes quite innate within everyone. Everyone has it, to speak very honestly about whatever topic it is. So I'd say just focus on yourself and really, really look within yourself about why you're speaking about it. Don't focus on anybody else in the crowd.
What's the balance, if there's any, between be yourself versus, surely there are just best practices that are fairly objective?
I think it comes with the topic that you speak about. I think if it's a very presentation set, you have statistics to say and certain things to say, then there's a certain order you say them in, and there's a certain way you hold yourself, the way you look at an audience, the way you sort of hold your hands, the way you pace slightly around the room. But if it's something more personal, then it comes with the way you naturally feel about it. So for example, with my poetry, I perform my poetry quite often, and my poetry sort of spans different topics. But when it's something really, really personal to me, because I wrote a poem about my mum, then it's something that the balance lies between being, for example, with the poem of my mum, being emotional enough to show that you care, or that you have a really beautiful piece that you want to show with people, but also toning it down a little bit just for people to be able to absorb it. So it's a hard balance, especially when you talk about something that's quite personal to you. When it's something more general, I think it's a little bit easier because you speak on a surface level instead of going a little bit deeper. That's what I think the difference between public speaking and poetry is. Poetry is showing the vulnerability of humanity. I think public speaking is very the facade and the outer layer that everyone has and everyone can practice. Poetry is more about who you are as a person.
That's beautiful. And do you want to maybe elaborate a bit more on at least the beginning of your spoken word journey and what that means?
Yeah. So I started spoken word. Okay. So I think when explaining about my spoken word journey, it always has to go back to my public speaking because that's where it started. So it started with Jack Petchy. Like I said before, I was always doing the speaking at my schools, and I was always doing public speaking generally. And then when I did the Jack Petchy and I won that, it was a huge, achievement. And my teacher actually said to me, she was like, Sam, you know what? You've got a really rhythmic way of speaking. And I was like, what do you mean? I didn't understand what she was talking about. And she was like, you should go to an open mic. And that was the first time I had heard about an open mic, about what it actually was. So I did some research and I went on my own to an open mic in Betterton Street. And I sat right at the back, nobody saw me, and I just watched. I was there to observe, and it was really, really beautiful just to see poetry, because that was the first time I had seen spoken word poetry, people expressing themselves in all these different ways. And I remember leaving and feeling so inspired and motivated. I left, and then I wrote a poetry piece, and I came back and I performed. Nobody was with me, nobody that I knew was with me, and I performed. And I felt that same thrill, oddly enough, that I felt when I won the Jack Petchy Award. Though I wasn't winning anything, it was that beauty of finding myself and finding that, you know what, this is actually something I really, really enjoy. And then after that, I started writing more and performing more. So it was just, the more I wrote, the more I perform. And don't get me wrong, it doesn't matter how many times I perform. It doesn't matter how many times I get up in front of a stage of people, whether that's 2 or 200. I still feel those nerves. That's quite human. But I think it's important to know how to manage those nerves and use those to your advantage. That's something that they taught us in the Jack Petchy competition, that if you're nervous, that's a good thing. It means you care. So you should use those nerves, so those jitters, to ensure that you either do it in your voice, so you make your voice louder, or you move your hands more. There's certain ways that you can move about it. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And why do you think you loved it so much? Was it an opportunity just to express some deeply held thoughts? Was it seeing the reactions in other people? Or was it just connecting the dots and making things make sense? Why do you think this is you?
That's a really, really great question. I think it's a balance of both. I think with public speaking, don't get me wrong, I love public speaking. It's still something I do on my day-to-day basis in architecture school, But I think with poetry, it's something a little bit more raw. It's something more, what I'd like to call a little bit more naked text when you perform it. With public speaking, like I said earlier, it's very surface level and it's very sort of light in that way. So with poetry, you can say some of the most heavy and hard-hitting stuff about yourself, about experiences you've had in life, and it can really hit people the same way, but without being so openly and saying, directly what happened. You can, I wouldn't say hide, but you can mask it in metaphors and similes and in that beautiful way, so people can sort of absorb it in the way that they want to. That's what I think is beautiful about poetry, is that it can be absorbed any which way that you feel that you can absorb it. With public speaking, it's quite direct. So these are the statistics, this is the fact, this is what's going on, and you have to be engaging in public speaking. With spoken word, it's more with the text that you write, and also paired with how you perform it, but your writing carries your whole performance fundamentally, and then you add it and you put the cherry on top with the way you perform it.
Because we're all obviously moved by stories, and ultimately I think what people remember are the metaphors, just the descriptive text that conjure up images in our heads. What I find interesting about your YouTube channel is that not only does it showcase your written work, but it's accompanied by either art or maybe your architecture talents, or just graphics that complements at least the complements the written. And I was wondering how do you see your almost toolkit of creativity, right? You can write, you can speak, you can draw, you can design. What's within your toolkit at the moment, and what are you good at? What might you want to develop? Just paint a picture of what you have now.
Really great question. I think I always considered myself a creative in every aspect of what I did in my life and the way in which I intend for my life to go, even within the degree that I'm studying as architecture. But like you said, I am an artist, so I've done art my whole life, whether it's at GCSE, at A-level, and also freelance, the things that I do in my spare time. And I think all the creatives, even filmmaking, video, like photography, being a videographer, whatever it might be, they all fall in together, and you can always sort of stitch and sew different parts of creativity together. So I think painting an image of how I guess how I intend for my poetry to go is always marrying it up with my art, because it's something I'm good at, it's something I also enjoy. But I think it's also finding a balance between, you know, your artistic work and your poetry or your poetic work, because sometimes what might happen is your art might overpower your poetry, and then it might become a thing where people recognize you as an artist than a poet. So it's finding a balance, which is I'm still figuring out. It's nothing that I've got set in stone, but with the animations and things like that, it's a way of also getting people to receive poetry differently, because often you hear poetry just spoken by a person, but you know, it's opening the revenue to artists, to people that like to doodle and things like that, so they can really, I guess, really absorb and understand poetry. It's bringing poetry to a wider plane, fundamentally.
That's really beautiful. And as you kind of develop your skills in the early stage, I see that, you know, you were given like leadership roles, such as like deputy head girl. How did you find opportunities to utilize the increasing skill set that you've got to do good?
Yeah, so I guess it's with any role that I've you know, been appointed to, it's always, for me anyways, to ensure that people are inspired. Everything that I do, from my poetry to my art to my degree, is always to inspire people, is to make people think. Because fundamentally, as much as I would like to hold, you know, people's hands through, you know, the successful life, whatever that might be, you know, it's hard to give a ABC step or recipe to that, because everybody's life is so individual. But it's fundamentally to inspire people, to make them think for themselves. And in everything that I do, from, you know, the mentoring to, you know, the roles that I had at school, was to make people believe in themselves, because I think that's the biggest thing that you can really, or the biggest, I guess, motivation you can give to a person, is for them to make themselves realize that they are worthy and that they are worth it, and that they should go the distance to fight for whatever it is that they want in life. Because a part of the story that I didn't actually tell you with Jack Petchy is, after that stage there was a next stage to compete, you know, wider and in a bigger competition. And though I had scored, you know, full marks in each category, I was so confident I'd go to the next stage. I didn't go to the next stage, and at that stage in my life, it really sort of took an axe hammer at my confidence, because I thought it was something that I was really good at, and I thought, yeah, definitely I'd go to the next stage. But, you know, I worked with a community project called MCP, which was Myland Community Project. It's how I got, you know, Ralph Lauren opportunities and things like that. They're fundamentally amazing. And Ray, which was a really amazing videographer / photographer at the time, he sort of found me when I was sort of trying to pick up my confidence from the Jack Petchy and stuff like that. And he said, you know what, Sam, you want to be a part of a short film about knife crime. And in that moment, little did he know that it had changed my whole perspective. There was this older, you know, photographer that believed in me, when at a time that I wasn't as confident as I am now. So always in people's journeys, there's you know, you see their mountain of success, but behind their mountain of success is always, I hate to say failure, because I feel like that word is I say overused but misunderstood, but their obstacles are much higher. That mountain is much higher than their successes. But yeah, that went down in a different tangent, but hey.
So on that point about what we don't see, I'm thinking like the iceberg graphics, you know,
Yeah.
what you see, the shiny, but underneath is all the sacrifice, the dedication, the rejections, etc., etc. I know being a creative isn't always easy. You know, you as much as you're trying to create based on your authentic experiences, as you said, you also need to inspire people, which part of it is people's reactions. So throughout your journey thus far, and I know that there's a lot more to come, but for now, what are some of the setbacks that you have had, and how have you dealt with that?
Good question. I think I've had a lot. That's my first statement. I've definitely had a lot, especially, like you said, being a creative. It's archaically, you know, looked down upon if you're an artist, or if you're, you know, anything to do with the creative field, that you have to be really, really, really good at it, or really, really talented to succeed in it. For myself, definitely, I think the Jack Petchy rejection was probably one of the biggest things in my build-up of that journey, because then it made me question whether that's something I actually want to go down, which is crazy to think about. I questioned it now knowing the journey that I have now. But it's also, when you write, for example, poetry, you speak about loads and loads and loads of different sort of topics and ideas, and sometimes they can be quite sensitive topics. So speaking to a group of people, and especially at open mic where you don't know these people, sometimes it can be received not in the way that you want it to, and often and most times that actually opens up a doorway for a conversation, which I think is really, really useful, and it lends a great insight into how they're thinking and how you're thinking, and then it therefore inspires you to create more poetry. So yeah, I think it's ultimately believing and trusting in your journey. The journey will never, ever, ever be easy, but you have to be unapologetically yourself. Obviously learn, and you know, positive criticism is always a great thing. Take on board anybody's criticism, but also understand and remember who you are as a person and why you do what you do. Because I wouldn't have stuck with poetry and public speaking this long if I didn't innately enjoy it.
So how do you personally think about creativity? Because that in itself as as a just academic concept, right? I know it's hard to give a definition, but I did a project on, well, one of my papers was on play, creativity and imagination.
Great.
And you know, we had to do a lit review on what creativity actually is. And I was just wondering how do you consider creativity, and can you define it?
Brilliant question. These are great questions. I think with creativity, it's a very subjective term. So everyone can sort of define it differently. But my sort of definition or how I view it is everyone is a creative. That's what I believe. Not everyone taps into their creativity, but everyone is a creative, and for me it's in the small sort of mundane and also hidden things in life that can be creative. Like, for example, I don't know, the way the sunlight shines on that certain branch or that leaf might inspire you to create a piece, a poetic piece, an artistic piece, a short film. There's small elements in everyone's day-to-day life that they can sort of spur and trigger to create something creative or create something within the creative field. But like I said, I think creativity is a very subjective term, but ultimately it means to be open. And I think to be open with your arts, whether it's drawing, painting, or whether you consider yourself an artist. So I say spoken word artist quite often, and that's because you're a creator. You create different pieces of poetry, different pieces of artwork, and they all integrate together to, make up this really beautiful piece, whatever it might be. So I think everyone is a creative, every single person on the face of this planet, but some people recognize it early, and some people don't. So.
One of the frameworks that I used for my coursework was based on the development model from Kaufman and Bergetto. So they essentially separated things in 4 types of creativity. They're mini C, little c, pro C, and big C. Mini C is like the initial spark of creativity from new subject matters that develops like new personally meaningful insight. Little c is expressions of creativity in everyday level. Pro C is creative expertise in a professional area, and big C is like eminent creative contributions that change a field. Do you agree with that kind of stage conception of creativity?
I think it's very difficult to categorize creativity. I think what they're doing is trying to make it digestible for people to understand it. But with a concept like creativity, it's so broad and also subjective that people can absorb it and take that in and believe it. But I also believe it's subject to change, that the things that they sort of say are not set in stone. That's what I believe.
Another framework that I use, I'm just curious to see how you think about it as a creative, whereas obviously I don't particularly consider myself to be a really creative person, but doing this coursework just definitely made me think. So the other framework that in the 1960s, the scholar called Rose kind of identified 4 distinct strands of creativity. You got person, process, press, and product. So person is like, the personal characteristics and traits of creativity. Process is like the cognitive processes to be creative. Press is the relationship between the individual and their environment, and product is the outcome of creativity. But that perspective was then criticized by other people later on for supporting like individualistic, static and disjointed vision of creativity. So another framework that I ultimately set on was called 5A. There's just a lot of, you don't need to remember all of it. I just want your gut instinct.
No, yeah, go for it.
So this 5A framework then is like actor, action, artifact, audience and affordances, which defined creativity as the action of an actor or group of actors in its constant interaction with multiple audiences and the affordances of the material world, leading to the generation of new and useful artifacts. Does any of those like concepts or ideas that stands out that you agree with or don't agree with or are confused, like because that's a very academic approach to creativity.
It is, and I think it's quite interesting to have an academic approach to creativity because, like I said, stereotypically we wouldn't consider any of the creatives academic. So it's interesting that you sort of present all those theories. What I do agree with actually that came up in one of the theories that you mentioned is audience, or rather people's upbringing or their lives that often influence your creativity. And like I said earlier, everyone lives a very separate life to each other, and how you view creativity or how you view actually life, forget creativity, how you view life is also a very creative way. So we might see for example, you might see a fallen bike, I might see a person who's had an accident. We all think of different things in certain circumstances. So it's also understanding how we view life. I think that's what makes people creative. It's the way in which you view life, and often that's influenced by cultures, by religions, by education, by upbringing, by where you grew up, by where you go to school. All of these things play a really important role in who you are.
So can an idea be considered novel or useful if other people don't recognize it as such? Like, do we need validation from any external other people other than the creator?
Ooh, do we need validation? I think I will always go back to creativity is subjective, and if you believe what you've created is beautiful and has it represents whatever you believe that it's meant to represent, whether it's for a short film or whatnot, then that piece you've created is for yourself. It's not there for other people to validate or there for other people to say, oh, that's a great piece. It's for you, and it's to represent a part of you. And not everybody is going to appreciate or enjoy or like the creative work that you put out there. That's I think the big challenge of being a creative. Not everybody, there's no singular answer to one brief.
Because many artists and writers or authors actually have their work respected or recognised long after they've passed away, right? Because in their time or in their society, it's just not known or appreciated as much, but a future generation might see upon it very differently.
Exactly. I think that's the beauty of something creative. You put it out there regardless, because it's what you believe in. It's having that gut instinct that we hear so often of. But yeah, it's putting work out there that you think is valuable, and it might just be to yourself, and it might be a very selfish thing to do, but later down the line, like you said, in a different time, in a different generation, that work might be picked up by somebody and thought, this is a fantastic piece of writing or a fantastic short film. I don't know why it wasn't received sooner. That's, I think, the beauty of something creative.
What are your predictions for generative AI and how that's going to reshape our conceptualization of creativity or originality?
I think always the conversation with AI or anything technological, I always put across the argument that the main difference between AI and humans is that I don't believe with my whole heart that AI can be as creative as humans. I think that's the main difference between us. You can replicate it and try and mirror it, but I don't believe you can really get down to the nitty and gritty cognitive way that we think about the world. And that's because, like I said earlier, as humans, we're influenced by our surroundings, and as a robot or whatever it might be, AI, you can input all those things, but it will be very different to the way in which you experience it. So you might get an AI machine or technology that can replicate a creative thought, but it cannot come up with an original creative idea. It can come up with amazing answers for dissertation questions, I'm sure, but for something with creativity, I don't think AI can compete.
So on that AI, if we think about what you're saying about it can't produce anything original, if we take that as the premise that it has to leverage the inputs or the data it has to then change and regurgitate, but it's based on the fundamental inputs that you have, and therefore you can't have anything, it can't create new things. If that is true, would it also be fair to say that because, as you said, we are so influenced by our life experience and what we see, what is to say that what we output is creative or original when how can we, surely all the new things could all the new things that we produce just be a manipulation of what we have seen even when we don't recognize it?
Perhaps, maybe. But I think with for example, AI doing it and us doing it, you might have, for example, if you have siblings and things like that, though you grow up in the same household, parented by the same parents, you might go to the same school, you might be very similar. Or let's take twins, for example. I know there's loads of conversations and debate about that, but how, when we think about twins, they look the same, they're brought up in the same family, things like that, but their personalities, who they are as individuals, are very, very different. So how they receive and understand the world is also very, very different. So with your question about AI and whether we believe it's an original piece, I think there might be replicas or similarities with the production of creative work. Might be, could be. But I also think even in those similar productions of work, for example, 2 short films, there will still be a slight difference or a slight nuance in both. There will never be a replica of, you might take inspiration from an artist or a poet, but your work will never truly be their own or because you're only taking inspiration from them. You're only using whatever they've done and implementing your ideas and your inspirations and your sort of experiences in life to create your own piece of work. So I think it will always be something, the byproduct will always be something new.
Okay. That's really interesting. Again, taking another pessimistic view, again, it's not what I always believe. I'm just putting out thought experiments, just see what you currently think. But if I take a pessimistic view that if I or anybody going to an art gallery or to watch anything creative, what they want is stimulation, they want thought-provoking ideas, they want new insights. And AI is able to produce, while not original stuff, they're able to produce things that will make the audience, because we're all limited, right? We don't have everything either. So as long as AI produce something that is something we haven't seen, then AI is able to give us a stimulation that originality, from our perspective, it is original because we haven't seen it. So from an employment perspective, from an economic perspective, then could AI fill the gap of human-created creativity? And if so, what implications does that have for someone like you who are aspiring to make a living out of this?
Again, really, really good question. I think with AI in particular, it can, there is no doubt that it probably can, and there are probably AI functions already out there that can create amazing art.
Because what I'm thinking, there's heaps of studies done by AI produced art and asking people to guess, is this AI or is this human?
Yeah.
We can't tell.
Exactly. But I think what makes it interesting as well is when, for example, you go to a gallery, National Art Gallery or V&A or wherever, and you see an art piece and you're intrigued by it. I think art, especially with, any sort of installation art, oil painting, acrylic painting, whatever it is, I think the beauty of it is you're not meant to fully understand it when you see it, but what you're meant to do is sort of research it afterwards, understand the artist's inspiration and background.
So it's the context.
I think it is the context, because if it was created by AI, right, let's say this beautiful installation piece was created by an AI mind, and you do the research and you think, this is really cool, and you go and you're like, it was actually created by a machine robot named 123, there's
nothing. That misses the meaning.
Yeah, there's nothing beyond that door is closed, that's it, and they move on and they look at another piece. But it's about the artist's background, their history, their context. They might have visited Ethiopia and then took that inspiration from this tribe that they met and then implemented it in that small sort of string that hangs low. Whatever it is, that's the beauty of unlocking puzzle pieces of art that I don't think AI can do.
That's awesome. And for you, how do you then integrate like your poetry with your architecture degree, or your expertise, or your passions or pursuits? How do you integrate those two?
I think architecture, where it is an interdisciplinary degree, so it has everything basically, and I always say to my architecture friends, you can hold a conversation with anyone, whether they're a STEM student, they're a music student, an architect will be able to hold a conversation with anyone because we cover so much ground that we can. So with art and architecture, I think everything in life, this is a fact, we interact with buildings our whole life, from when we are born to when we pass away. And to create something, for me anyways, the interest that I have in architecture is how you feel within a space. So for example, when you go to school, or when you go back to your, primary school or the school you were once at, you have this sort of feeling, and it might be influenced by, the wooden floors and the low seated benches that only the year 6 people could sit on, or whatever it might be. That feeling is created by architecture, whether we acknowledge it or we don't. So that's a very abstract way of thinking it. So often what I do in my sort of degree and my practice in architecture is to implement poetry that explains really sort of complicated or abstract ideas of how you feel within a space. So for example, my last brief was to create a theatre, and the theatre that I'd created was where the audience and the actors rather, sat amongst the audience. So it was and the audience didn't know. And it was in a rounded theatre, so creating a poem that would fundamentally explain that shock of realising the actor sat next to you the whole time during the performance. It's a way of speaking the architectural language to a non-architect. So that's the way in which you, I say, convince others of your idea, but as well as show the beauty of how broad architecture can be.
That's really cool. That's really, really cool.
Thank you.
And for you to be, say, in a place like London, where it's, such renowned for its architecture throughout time and throughout history, what do you think you notice that perhaps someone like me, who don't have the academic background, the experience, like, how do you think you see things differently now that you've taken on this study? Or how have you changed? How have your perspective changed after you've taken on the formal study?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, because in architecture specifically, I think now, I know now actually, I view every building in an architectural lens. So I can't ever look at a building and just look at it for its face or facade value. I'm always thinking about the brick, or how the housing or the floor plans are laid out. And I think that's the way architecture school makes you think. It always makes you think quite broadly and quite openly about everything really, and how in which it was built, the construction of it, the physics of it. But I think with me living in London, and I've lived in London my whole life, but I've also been influenced by architecture that is from my Morocco and Thai background, which is very, very different as well. So 3 different places that have very different architecture. I think for myself, living in London, you see it quite, frequently, and in my area in particular, there's a lot of development that's happening, new development. And there's a part of me that it makes me slightly upset, only because it's changing the area I grew up in and what I consider home. So I think it's more closely linked to the idea of what we consider home. I think that's the entire thing that encapsulates architecture. Where you live, one thing, but also where you consider you belong, which is another thing, and that could go on for ages, that conversation. But for me, living in London, it's seeing the comparison, I think, and I'm still learning. There isn't like a full arsenal of ideas and concepts and theories I can apply to every building in London. But
what's your niche within architecture, if you have one?
it's how we feel in space. That's what, and when I say space, I don't mean like...
Is that like qualitative, like just understanding people's subjective...
Yeah, it's a bit of what we call phenomenology. So it's understanding, there was a really amazing book I remember reading by Peter Zumpfer called Atmospheres, and he talks really intricately about how light enters a room and the smell of an atmosphere, or the dimming of light. All of these things really do add to vibes, or things that we call like bohemian or modern or brutalist. All these ideas they implement into one another. So I'd say it's the small intricacies that I think that make the biggest impact in people's lives is my niche.
I love that. That's really, really cool.
Thank you.
I love how you always tie the human element as well, and just realising that everything that we produce and do has a real impact on people's perceptions and their kind of daily realities, which leads me to be very curious about what could you maybe elaborate a bit more on your new initiative, give us the mic, and especially how the sole requirement is that each performer must lend their voice. What does that mean?
So that fundamentally means, so after I came back from Uni Slam, which was a fundamentally amazing experience, I realised in Cambridge we have CUPS, which is, Cambridge Poetry and Prose Society, but then we also have like Blackbirds, which is amazing other sort of poetry society, and I feel like we didn't have something in between, and Give Us the Mic was that in between. It was pitching or marketing it where it wasn't pitching directly to poets or people that consider themselves poets, because I know some amazing, I say performers or people that can stand up on stage and do an amazing comedy skit or amazing rap performance, but they don't consider themselves poets. So Give Us the Mic is an initiative that's meant to get people on the stage, though it's probably a 30 centimeter step up kind of stage, not a huge sort of auditorium, but regardless, it's getting that confidence to stand in and speak in front of a group of people you don't know, and the more you do it, the more you feel comfortable. But also Give Us the Mic is an initiative to get to know other creatives in Cambridge and understand that whether
Would it be in person?
Yeah, it would be in person. So it'd be a fortnightly open mic
so it's
night.
basically like open mic night.
Yeah, yep. An open mic night.
And you'll be like booking the venues and doing the logistics.
Yeah. So it'll be dependent, obviously those things are still need to be figured out, but where and the place when, but fundamentally it's an open mic night open to everyone, not just people that consider themselves creatives or performers, everyone, just to make friends, get to know each other, but also to perform. And I think that's really, really important, to have the confidence to lend your voice. And what I mean by lend your voice is to speak, because I feel like most people, they have amazing ideas, amazing things they want to express, but never in front of an audience, because again, you feel like people are judging you, people, you might not be saying the right things. But then again, that's the beauty of public speaking or spoken word. Just to speak in front of an audience, to connect with a broad amount of people, is a really, really good skill that you can use in life, but also within any profession that you go down. So it's teaching those transferable skills underneath all the other creative stuff.
Do you anticipate lots of people will show up, and if so, what do you think are the demographics? Not in terms of where they live, but in terms of like, do you think there will be experienced speakers? Do you think there will be new people? Do you think, just what do you anticipate out of this initiative?
Well, I'd hope people would turn up, but then also I intend to invite poets and friends of mine that are willing to perform. So it's mixing in between performers, and of course I will perform to warm up the room. And it was funny because in Unislam they called it a sacrifice poet, which I found quite a funny concept. But it was this idea that one person or one poet would be the sacrifice, which is rather warm up the room and get people just like feeling a little bit more relaxed. So I'll be inviting friends from different poetry backgrounds, but also non-poetry backgrounds that are willing to speak. And the demographics, to be fair, I think when it's pitched as a poetry open mic, then obviously I'd expect poets, but I expect everyone and anyone, it's never limiting because I don't know, you study mathematics, you can't come to an open mic or whatever nonsense like that. You come if you want to speak, and even if you don't want to speak, you come to make friends, you come to communicate with people. The whole night is about networking and communicating and get to know one another. So even if you're not standing up on stage, though I highly encourage you to, you can still just speak and get to know people around. But yeah, that's my intention with it.
That's really cool. In terms of all the achievements you've had, and obviously well done to you for all the efforts you put in and showing the initiative to put yourself out there, what are you most like proud of? Because we've touched on like Unislam, you helping other people, we've touched on the public speaking, the Jack Petchy competition, but is there an award or a competition that perhaps initially you didn't expect to get it or to receive it, but ultimately now you look back and go, wow, that is cool?
Yeah, I think it would probably have to be, it's probably a really, really simple one. And amongst all the things I have achieved, the biggest achievement that catalyzed everything was when I went to that open mic on Betterton Street. I didn't win an award. I didn't, win a famous title, or nobody sort of knew me at that time. But I think it was a personal achievement within me that I was able to speak and to perform, and I was doing it for myself at the end of the day. I think with Jack Petchy, it was more that I was doing it.
That's very cool. We're just going to take a short break to move because there are kids playing outside, which, it's their play space, but we'll be back. We are now back. We've moved outside again. It's nice to find some quiet space until these kids find us again.
Find us, yeah, definitely.
Okay, so we were talking about like what achievement you're proud of, and I was wondering, looking ahead then, is there a competition, an award, a project that you feel like would be a real concrete, tangible next step?
I think the next step for me, so like I mentioned before, the biggest sort of achievement of mine was going to Betterton Street to perform at the open mic. Like I said, I didn't win an award, but it was a personal achievement within me that made the biggest difference. But looking towards the future, I guess, well, at the moment, I'm working on getting my work published in an anthology, so that's something that I've been working tirelessly to do and to edit. And I also do a lot of animation and drawing, so it's also accompanying my poetry with drawing that takes twice the time that it would just writing a piece. So that's probably something that would be a huge, huge achievement of mine. For myself, I think when I was younger, it's a dream that isn't as academic to create a poetry anthology, but it's a dream within me that I've wanted to achieve for a really, really long time. So to be able to, or to be working on it anyways, is a pleasure, and it's an honour, and it's really, really exciting. But to get it actually published where I can hold it will be something really phenomenal.
That's great. So we've talked a fair bit about your creative talents, which, as we all agreed on, that it's kind of built and shaped by personal experiences. Like, were you always a really artistic, creative person? Were you a good student at school? What was, who is Sam actually behind the authors and behind all the glamoring achievements and founding initiatives?
That's a fantastic, great question. When I was younger, I think I'd always had a fascination in education and to learn. But I think back in school, maths, English, literature, it was something that was quite mundane, that I wasn't as interested in, simply because I didn't find my interest. So definitely in primary school, it was something that I enjoyed playing around more than I enjoyed, education. But then when I got to secondary school and they had niches, certain things you could learn about, that's something that really made me notice, oh, you know what? I actually enjoy this, and I want to put my head down to do well in it. But I think before everything, funnily enough, I was pretty shy. I spoke when I was spoken to, and I wouldn't really be the one to put my hand up to speak or anything like that. So I understand nervousness and I understand shyness, because I was once like that. But what actually started me off, and only a few people actually know this, is I used to do drama back in school, so acting, and I remember in in secondary school, I had an amazing drama teacher called Miss Jazor, and she was phenomenal. And in her class, I was the most confident. And it was great. I felt like I was right at home, and it was a really great environment to gain your sort of confidence. And, you know, I hadn't continued acting after that point or anything drama related, but it was something that was a great stepping stone. I think before even any public speaking, anything like that even came into the picture, it was more just acting and being in a room and working with others was super fun.
That's great. And I'm assuming you were pretty popular?
Back in school? I don't know, actually. I think I was in primary school, perhaps, because I was different, like I looked different to everybody else. But in secondary school, I was the person that would put my head down, just to study, just to work. I didn't really get in much trouble. I was often just the type of student that would sit and do my work and focus, but I would always defend myself when needed. Because
when have you had to?
Back in school. When, like I said, I was different, so I'm dual heritage. I grew up in East London, and there's not many people that looked like me and my brother, so that often makes you a target for bullying. When you're younger, I think what people often tell you is tell the teacher and things like that, which is a good thing to do, but also it's a great thing to also defend yourself where needed and speak up for yourself, because really and truly no one is going to do that for you. You need to do it for yourself, and it's good character building as well. People say bullying is good character building. It really and truly is, because you learn about yourself and you learn about your boundaries, and as soon as you draw that line and make it clear to a person that you're not to be messed around with, then they won't ever cross the boundary, because communicating that is a lot scarier in person.
Older brother, younger brother?
I have an older brother.
And is he creative?
Yeah, actually, funnily enough, he was the person that got me into art. He was the person that was the drawer, was the artist, was the photographer. He does some amazing photography now. So he's still a creative. Studied English lit, so he's still in that world, but the type of creatives we are, he also writes poetry, but I think I'm a little bit more, I say, a serious poet in comparison to my brother, because he does it just like a bit for fun and a more like a freelance thing. But my brother was definitely a huge, and still is actually, a very huge inspiration to me growing up and now, because I think older siblings, I'm not an older sibling, but I can probably understand older siblings pave the way for the younger siblings, whether they want to take that path or not. They clear the trees and they sweep the floors so you can walk without any troubles. So big thanks to my big bro for helping me out.
What about your parents?
Oh yeah, no, my parents, I think I'd like to say I'm my biggest supporter, but I think my parents would highly disagree. Every sort of poetry performance that I've been in, and it started off when I sort of started to gain traction with my poetry, my mum and my dad as well would always try and be there for me. And I remember a really funny story. I had these business cards that I had made like on like Word or something. I didn't get them printed professionally, though I have them printed professionally now. Back then I didn't. I remember I sellotaped them and I tried to make them look all good. And I was like to my mum, like, these are business cards I want to give out. And my mum was like, okay, I'll give them out, don't worry. So it was something that me and my parents, we worked really, really closely with. And my parents really are fundamentally my biggest supporters in everything that I do, and I'm really, really blessed and thankful to have parents like that push you in every aspect of your life. Even when you feel like giving up, they won't give up. They will always keep you going, whether it's dragging you by the leg or making you realize that this is something that you want to do. Right now it doesn't feel like it, but in the long term it will always be like that. So definitely another thanks to my parents.
That's wonderful. That's really beautiful to always think about, I guess, how fortunate we are with other people's sacrifices, and just we never really do anything ourselves, and we've all depended on other people's support. And did you feel like you had good teachers or coaches, or was there someone growing up who you had a kind of mentor? Did you have a mentor, that kind of relationship where someone who could just listen to you and give you helpful tips because they just knew you so well on a personal level?
I think in secondary school, probably my mentor, which wasn't my official mentor, but was someone that I really, really did look up to, was my art teacher. She really, really saw me for the person I am and not the person other people wanted me to be. So she knew that I was a creative and I should go down that creative avenue, and she was always one to push me. And I think the people that push you are often the people that care about you the most, because they know your potential and they know how far you can go. So, you know, actually all the teachers in the art department was phenomenal. You know, Miss Hill, Miss Khan, all of them, they were really, really helpful in helping you find yourself and find your journey. As you know, whoever you wanted to be. And I think it's really scary to make that decision about what degree you want to do and, you know, the next step in life. So having them support you is really, really important. But I also did have a mentor. Like I said, I mentor with Zero Gravity, but I was also a mentee once, and my mentor on there was so great. He's the one that sort of directed me to apply to Cambridge, because I was quite nervous to do it, as well as my sociology teachers. I think that's probably why I'm so interested in the phenomenology of things, because I'd studied sociology and a bit of psychology when I was in school. So everything plays its role in who you become and also who you plan to be.
How much should I trust you?
Trust me.
Given the psychology of false memories.
I was like, trust me? What have I said?
How much should I trust you?
You should trust me wholeheartedly, David, because I'm an entirely honest person. No, false memories, funnily enough, was a really, really interesting topic that I actually watched a TED Talk on, and I created a really cool presentation on it, and I found it really interesting. Hence why, don't worry, trust me entirely, I'm a very honest person. You can check all my academic accolades, they're all there. But it was just something that I was very interested in, and I didn't study psychology as an A-level, I studied it as like an EPQ. So it was, you know, marrying up with my sociology knowledge and my interest. But it was something that I'm quite interested in where I was, and I still sort of am, because it was, I guess, lockdown or one of the lockdowns, I can't remember, where I just watched a TED Talk on false memories, and it was something really interesting to me. I was like, someone can speak to you and wholeheartedly believe, you know, something about themselves and memory, but then it could be entirely false. And they don't even know it. That's something that was interesting to me at the time, but yeah.
So I also saw that you have done like boxing and like other things like badminton, beyond kind of the strictly more what people would consider to be creative. So what other dimensions of you are there? So I really enjoyed back in school. I think, admittedly, I'd like to get more involved in it at university, but with sport, I was a very, very sporty person. I would do athletics and things like that. I think boxing was my biggest thing that I really enjoyed. Again, it was something my brother introduced me to, and that he did boxing, he did karate and Muay Thai and all of that stuff. So it was something that I looked up to my brother so much that I always wanted to sort of try what he was doing and stuff like that. So it's something that I did for a while. And then I sort of did badminton. Badminton was great fun, really, really tiring sport, my God, but it was great fun. But I think at the moment, I just dabble to keep myself healthy and fit. I think with a sport, I'd like to probably pick a sport and then stay constant with it. But at the moment, it's just staying healthy. I play often when we were all back in Cambridge. You know, football with friends was always great fun, my gosh. You know, sliding around in the grass and mud, and just, you know, staying healthy, I think, is really important, and a really important balance for any academic lifestyle is to have your interest, your passion, your degree, your social life, but also to keep yourself healthy and fit. What's your vision for the Cambridge University Poetry and Prose Society for the next year?
Oh, what, the actual society? Or...
Yeah. What do you want it to be next year?
Oh, wow.
What can they do better?
Oh, what they can do better. I think market it better or publicise it more. I think for me, I got involved with CUPS or the Poetry and Prose Society by stumbling upon one of their open mic posts, and then I went, and then sort of, it was hard to find. It was somewhere in Robinson's College. Was it Robinson's? I can't even remember, or Claire's, one of them. And it's just like, it's hard to access. So I think I hope that they sort of make it more accessible to everyone and anyone, and also pitch it more, whether it's at freshers fairs or you know, partnering with different sort of Cambridge societies. I know Blackbirds does a lot with jazz sock, so it's good to branch out and see how broad poetry can be. But I think because Cups is very academic, it's the English literature students that write very beautiful and articulate poetry, but it's a type that others that are just starting off doing poetry might feel slightly intimidated by, so it's making it more accessible and open to everyone, really.
So looking ahead for your second year at Cambridge, do you feel like, or how would you approach it differently to first year, if at all?
I think I would trust my gut a lot more, simply because I think architecture is the type of degree that's cumulative, so you learn along the way. It's not, there is and isn't a right and wrong answer when it comes to architecture. You know, you get given a brief, you get given a site, you get given clients, and then you're like, build a structure. So it's, you know, there's so many different answers and so many different ways to that one brief. So it's trusting your gut, trusting your instinct that you're doing it right and you're doing it for the right reasons. But also, you know, for me anyways, I was quite nervous implementing my poetry in my architecture work because it's something that hadn't been done before. But like I said, trusting my gut and trusting my creative process. You know, my creative process is to write, and, you know, I should use that to my advantage. So I think definitely for next year, or, you know, come October, I'll be more confident in my skin when it comes to my architectural process.
Awesome. And how do you find, you know, I personally think one of the best parts about Cambridge when you live in a college is you are interacting with people of very different backgrounds and different degrees, and as you mentioned, how architecture gives you the ability to have exposure on a variety of different areas. But do you feel like, say, some of the conversations you've had with people from very different background to yours, or who think in a very different way, has concretely shaped your creative output?
I think it definitely lends a different insight into the way that I think, because definitely going into Cambridge, you have a certain mindset about how you think it's going to go, how you think the degree is going to go, how you think you're going to make friends, what type of friends, all of that. You have a set sort of idea, but always that will change when you speak to people. And I think it's really good to speak to people that are from a different background, like you were saying, different cultures, different subjects, whatever it might be, and they will always teach you more about yourself, and teach you about your opinions, and whether you agree or disagree with certain aspects in life, that's entirely up to you. But it's how you communicate with people. That's why I pitch and I speak so highly of communication and public speaking. It's because it's so important. You know, we do it every day, and to communicate, or to better communicate with people, will not only better your conversations and what you learn from others, but it will also better the way in which you view life, you know. And I think it's always very important to view life with an open mind, never to view it with the box that you are in or the category that you are in, and then to think, okay, that person thinks differently, so I'm not gonna you know, even open up to that person. Open up to everyone, speak to everyone. You never know what you might learn.
That's awesome. That's really cool. And I know a lot changes in the year, let alone you just finished your first year of your degree, but what's your dream? Like, what would you like to do? Would you like to, like, say, travel around the world and just perform spoken word? Would you like to be a best-selling author? Like, how do you want your career to pan out?
Dreams is a good topic to talk about, simply because I've written a lot of poetry on dreams, and a lot of people
happily ever after.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of people that know me I'm a big dreamer, but the thing is, with me, I'm a dreamer with a plan. So I will always have a backup plan, an ABC of how I intend to achieve any dream that I set myself. And funny thing is, actually, I have a book, and I call it the Dream Book. And in this book is all the dreams that I have from when I was very, very young to or what I, you know, think about in my life, and I write it down. We like to call it manifestation. Yeah, I write it down, and then I date it, and I look back onto it. Funnily enough, getting into Cambridge was in that book. So
it's in your subconscious.
Yeah, so it's something you believe in, and, you know, if you read this book, David, you wouldn't believe the dreams that I have. It's that, you know, crazy and out there and ambitious, but it's meant to be there as a diary or record of how you think. And I always encourage people to think ambitiously, but think with a plan. To answer your question, what my dream is for myself it's a combination of things. I would like to perform my poetry and be out there, but then I would also like to almost change the architecture profession in itself to be more broad and to be more open to creative aspects like poetry, and to see how that can entirely change the way we think about architecture. So it's implementing all my interests into one thing. Of course, being a best-selling author would be fantastic, but it's also, I think, my dreams are always rooted in purpose and inspiration. So whatever I achieve in life, whether it's being a best-selling author or traveling around the world or, you know, being this amazing architect, it's on the premise that I want to inspire people. So if that dream comes along, it comes along. If not, then that's absolutely fine. But I think it's, for me, just my dream is to be happy in what I do. And I know that's quite abstract and it isn't giving you a direct answer, but it's to be happy with my poetry, my art, my creativity. And yeah.
Are you ever concerned about, the lack of opportunities to, say, earn a living from creative pursuits where, lots of people want to do poetry, they want to be authors, but at least in the meantime, even when we think about the famous authors now, they've had to go through periods of taking on like side jobs that are not pleasant, but you need to do it just to put food on the table. Is that a worry?
Of course, I think it's a natural worry for anybody, but I think my plan anyways, and the plan I put across towards anyone that's planning to do anything creative, is to have, for example, for me, my practical dream, people like to say, is architecture. It's a solid degree and it's a solid job that you will become or, be in later life. But I think often with creatives, that's what I think is so beautiful and so challenging as well about being a creative. You need to do both in order to balance it. So I intend to do architecture and become an architect. That's still a big dream of mine. But on the side, you have to work twice as hard to balance your architecture degree as well as, your dream in poetry or whatever it might be. So I think, yes, there is a worry of, bringing food on the table, things like that. But like I said, I'm a dreamer with a plan. So I like to have architecture as sort of the main...
What's plan B and C?
For life?
Yep.
Plan B and C. It depends what dream it is, really. So plan B is often to become, if I don't, what do you mean if I don't become a poet, or what kind of...
If you don't achieve your plan A.
Well, then it's always going on. I think architecture will always be an achievable dream, that you can, to be an architect. That's with anything. That's with everything though. So to be a writer or to be a doctor is something that you can achieve and come at a certain level of. I think with poetry or with art, that's where all the plan A, B, C, D, E, F, G comes in, because there's so many things that could go wrong within it. But it's very intricate to talk about, and I'd love to say my plan B is then to go off to acting or to do stuff like that. But, I think it's a little bit more intricate and detailed.
Great. Any plan D, E, do you think that far?
No, I do actually. You'd be surprised. I do. I plan everything.
Thick book then.
Yeah, it's a very thick book, almost a novel.
It would be like a dictionary.
Yeah, exactly.
So you went to St. Paul's, which I assume has a religious connection.
I assume so. I don't think so, actually. St. Paul's Way Trust School was just a school that I believe, I should know the history of it, but before it wasn't the best school in Tower Hamlets.
You changed it?
They've changed it. They demolished it and then rebuilt it and then had a new sort of head teacher, and the whole system had changed. But in the past, St. Paul's Way Trust School is what it's called. It wasn't a school that you would go to for an education, if I'm being entirely honest with you. It was a school that was quite dangerous. But like I said, they've revamped it, they've changed it, Ofsted outstanding. They've got, they really did fix it up over the years.
Are you religious?
Am I religious?
Are you here for a reason? Did God put you here, or?
I believe everything in life is, I don't believe in coincidences. I think that's a big thing. Call it religious or call it not. I think everything in life has a reason. The people you meet and the things that you interact with and the subjects that you study and whatever it is, it teaches you something about yourself. Every failure in your life teaches you something about yourself. So everything that you face, and if you can't come out of it and say, you know, I learned this, then I think it's time for a bit of self-reflection and to look back and see, you know what, I think it is about, you know, who you are as a person.
Why is it not a coincidence?
Because I just don't believe it. I think things are too intricate in life, or too beautiful in life.
So why is it that intricate and beautiful?
What would you mean, why?
Like, you know, people who are religious will say, well, it's God's design and there's a higher power and control. So you're saying it's not a coincidence, in meaning that it must not be a coincidence, but why is it not a coincidence then, if you then...
Because I think when you look at your life and when you see the reasons as to why things happened, you'll realise, oh, okay, let's, for example, take education as an example. Let's say you work really, really hard to get into a university and you don't get in, and you worked super, super hard, like, you know, slaved away to get in, and you realise, okay, you know, that's it. The world is against me, God is against me, whatever you want to say. But then in a few years, when you look back to it and you think, actually, I don't think I was meant to be there, and I'm so much better in the place that I currently am in, then...
Such a common feeling people have with a bit of hindsight and time and maturity.
Exactly. So
but I guess, back to my original question, why do you think that is? Is that just a coping mechanism that we have, or is there actually potentially a higher power guiding and...
I think
like that can go beyond our own short-sightedness?
I think it really depends what type of person you are. I think if you're a religious person, you will view that God is the Almighty and will look after you and guide you in directions in which you go in.
But what do you
believe? I think for me, I believe the world is a really beautiful place, and I think that whether you want to call it God or you want to call it the universe, I don't know, but I think it's that everything in this life is set out for you, and God has a plan for everybody. So I think it's the process that you take that you must trust. Whether you believe in God or you don't, you must trust the universe, and you must trust that everything will fall into place where it needs to.
When we die, is that it?
Ooh. I think for me, I do believe in an afterlife, because then I think if there isn't one, you know, people won't have this premise of you can do whatever you want in this world and there's no consequence, if that makes sense. There's prison, there's jail, there's stuff like that, but there isn't anything that stops you from doing something crazy and in this life. So I think I do believe in an afterlife. I do believe once you die there is, whether you call it a heaven and a hell, which is what we archaically call it, but I think it becomes very, very difficult when we view the world in a lens that there is no consequence for our actions, and I think that can be quite dangerous to view, you know, life in that aspect.
How often do you think about these bigger questions? And because I'm just thinking, like, lots of spoken word and creativity to touch people, it's really touching on the human condition that we all experience. So how often or when do you contemplate these meta questions?
Quite often. I think as a human you do it quite normally, because I think the things that we are certain of in this life is that obviously we are born and we are alive, but then one day we will pass away. I think that's a certainty that we can guarantee. You know, as much as, you know, we spoke about dreams and, you know, I want to achieve this and I want to achieve that, that's not a certainty. You can work towards those things, but us passing away is definitely a certainty. So thinking about things like life and death, and if there's an afterlife, you know, heaven and hell, I think it's a really important thing to touch upon, and I think it's really valuable to have that self-reflection within you. Whether, like I said, whether you believe in religion or not, I think it's a self-reflection within who you are as a person, to see what you truly believe and not influenced by others.
Interesting, very interesting. I guess in the context of giving you a legacy with the interview, as we mentioned, a snapshot of where you are, and that you look back hopefully on it 30, 40 years time and see the reason for this recording. Is there anything else that you would like to, you know, keep in this recording, or else I've got a round of rapid fire questions and we'll wrap it up?
Yeah, go for it. Go for the rapid fire questions.
Great. What dish do you cook best?
Oh, what dish do I cook best? Pad Thai, which is a Thai dish.
Favorite Disney character?
Oh, Mulan.
What never fails to make you laugh?
My mum.
She's a what?
She's a what?
Well, what never fails to make you? Sorry, I was just being playful.
Sorry. I was like, that's the next question. She's like, what?
No, my bad.
No, that's okay, go for it.
What nicknames have you got?
What nicknames have I got?
Yeah.
I don't think I have. My dad tends to call me tafila, which is like an Arabic sort of saying for my child.
What's the dumbest dare you've ever agreed to?
Oh my god. To dance in like a mall full of people.
Dogs or cats?
Oh, dogs, 100%.
What's your guilty pleasure?
Ooh. I don't know. What's my guilty pleasure? I don't think I have one.
If your Google search was revealed to the public, what would be your first reaction?
I'd laugh. I don't think it's anything that serious, to be honest. I think it's quite humorous, the things I Google.
Your favourite type of music?
Ooh, R&B.
Do you have a favourite pun?
A favourite pun? I don't think I do.
What animal are you most similar to?
A bird.
Why?
Because I fly high. I'm joking. because everything in my life, I think I wanna be quite free with things, and I think birds are quite independent creatures in the way that they do things for themselves, but then they also know how to look after others.
Most thought-provoking metaphor or imagery?
Most thought-provoking metaphor? As in, do you want me to come up with one, or one that I've heard?
Just any that comes to mind now. Feel free to be original and creative.
Oh my gosh, put me on the spot, David. No, the first thing that pops into my head, if I'm honest, is the world is your oyster. Probably a very cliche one, but it's one that pops into my head.
Great. And final rapid fire question would be tricky one. If you could have like a 1 hour chat with someone, alive or dead, who would it be and what would you ask him or her?
Anyone. It could be anyone. I think I would speak to my grandmother and ask her if she enjoyed poetry. She was a writer, but I didn't think poetry was something that was big back then or was even a thing back then. But I'd probably ask her that.
Great. I think second to last question. What questions do you think people, including me and you, and just our generation perhaps, should ask more of, either to ourselves, either to other people? What are, the thoughts that we, what do you think is important nowadays for people to ask more of that people just don't do enough?
I think people should ask themselves more who they are. I think...
Are we fixed though?
No, but that's the point. I think you know, throughout life we go through education and we go through jobs and we go through meeting people and things like that, and I think most of the time what's quite natural is humans like to tailor themselves to fit in certain situations, and it's quite natural because it's what we feel comfortable with.
So on that point, what do you think people misunderstand about you?
Ooh, misunderstand about me? That's a great question. That I think, like we mentioned earlier, that I am human, and like everybody else, I do struggle, but I think it's certain people within my life that know about that struggle. On the outside, it's quite easy to assume a person is doing really, really well and is achieving all these great things, but like I said, we spoke about that iceberg analogy. There's always things going on behind the scenes, and to always be thoughtful of that and to be mindful of people's lives, I think.
Great. And final question with all the wider context of your upbringing in Tower Hamlets, in what you called a deprived area. Well, it's not what you called, but what you told me is a deprived area. Difficult place with bullying and with a lot of almost intolerance for differences, and for you to be, you know, not necessarily from the UK and looking different, you and your brother needing to stick up for yourselves, but always having that support from your parents, the sacrifice that they've made and making you laugh and supporting you and backing you to take on your dreams, for you to find different hobbies, from badminton to boxing, and really landing on the creative side of things and being able to do like public speaking, being able to you know, do the competitions and just learn more about what you enjoy, you know, sharing, inspiring people, crafting narratives, touching people's hearts, showing vulnerability, utilizing the medium of storytelling as a way to raise awareness for important issues such as knife crime, for you to be appointed in leadership positions such as like deputy head girl, you know, signing up to do a bunch of voluntary work such as, you know, mentoring other people and receiving opportunities to work on, you know, various like, you know, film projects such as with like Ralph Lauren, thinking about your architecture and just your dream book where you try and manifest the reality and to think and to dare and to just live boldly, and a lot of it has obviously come to fruition, which I'm sure would be very very empowering to know that if you set your mind to it and if you sacrifice and if you work double as hard, then you could get to places that perhaps younger you didn't always feel that conviction and belief, for you to win the competitions like National Public Speaking Champion, to coach other people like such as through the Uni Slam and getting like a third place for them to get third place. I'm sure that's very empowering and purposeful and uplifting, to build that community and for you to start thinking about how do you inspire more people, and such as like the Give Up the Mic initiative that you plan to host on a fortnightly basis from next year. When you think about all of that, and you know the icebergs and the struggles you face, the rejections you face, and the uncertainties that you've had, and how the universe or God has really tried to fit things together for you, what's one message, quote, or saying you wish every educator, coach, teacher, motivational speaker, poet would promote, and every child would internalize? Your condensed philosophy summary of how to live a good life.
I think it would be, and I'm sure I mentioned it right at the beginning, but it would be believe entirely in yourself and be unapologetically yourself. I think every single thing that you mentioned, every single thing that I've faced in my life, it's in a journey to figure out who you are as a person, and also believing entirely in yourself. You know, when you start off anything, it won't be great, you know, and you have to acknowledge that. So people just drop the ego, it's absolutely going to be fine, and just persevere, go through it, and you'll end up realizing, yeah, this is all worth it in the end.
Well, Sam, thank you so much. I think you truly model a lot of the things that you express through our creativity, the confidence, but the self-awareness to to understand, you know, just the nuances of life and the acceptance that not everything is within our control, but we do have the responsibility to look out for one another and to utilize our talents and creative pursuits for the benefit of humanity and inspiring others, and even just valuing the little things such as giving someone a confidence booster, that we can all overcome our fears through a community and through supporting each other. And I think it's your honesty and your passion and hope for life that is what I will take away from this recording, and that's something I will definitely think about for a Sunday evening, is how could I think more boldly about what I want to achieve and what I want to do to help and serve other people. So thank you for the inspiration. I hope you've enjoyed.
No, thank you so much for having me. You've been a fantastic, I hate to say interviewer, but conversationalist today, where we can speak about. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's such a pleasure, such an honour.